Welcome to the White House virtual convening on transgender equality. I'm White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, and I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. I'm excited to welcome you to this important and historic national conversation about equality, freedom, and opportunity for transgender, gender nonconforming, and non binary Americans. As President Biden said long before he became president, transgender rights are one of the most important civil rights movements of our lifetime. And as I was proud to affirm earlier this year from the White House briefing room podium, transgender rights are human rights. On his very first day in office, President Biden charged the whole of the federal government with preventing and combating discrimination against transgender Americans. Agencies across the government are working to ensure that transgender Americans have equal protection under law and the freedom to live authentic, healthy, and safe lives. But we know there's so much more work to do to secure full equality for every trans person in our country. Because transgender people, especially trans women of color, continue to face epidemic levels of violence, poverty, and discrimination. Today, we'll hear from transgender youth, activists, athletes, and leaders around the country on their work to build a fair and more inclusive America. We'll learn about their triumphs and their hopes and about the enduring forms of discrimination that too many trans people still face in our country. Let's take a look.
Hi, everybody, and happy Pride Month, and welcome to the virtual White House. I'm Ambassador Susan Rice, and I use the pronouns she, her, and hers, and I have the great privilege of being President Biden's domestic policy advisor. I'm super excited to be joined today by 4 phenomenal young people who are transgender activists from around the country. Today, we're going to hear their stories. As President Biden has said, transgender youth are brave and they're strong. Every young person deserves to be able to live freely as their authentic self and to be met with unconditional love and support. This is a time of both great hope and possibility in the transgender civil rights movement, with more and more young people able to come out as transgender, gender non-conforming, or non-binary, and be loved and supported just as they are. But it's also a challenging and worrying time. In the past few months, we have seen an unacceptable, horrific increase in legislation in states across the country that target transgender young people just for being themselves. But like generations of transgender activists who fought to make our country a more fair and inclusive society, the young people with us today are leading a movement for full equality. So I'm looking forward now to hearing from each of you, and let me begin with Samir Jha. Samir, welcome. You've had the painful experience of being bullied at school because of who you are. And that experience helped you to become a powerful advocate for other LGBTQ plus youth. Can you tell us, please, more about your journey and why you think it's important for transgender and non-binary youth to be able to be themselves at school?
Yes, so my name is Samir Jha. I use any pronouns. I identify as queer and non-binary. I was bullied all throughout elementary and middle school for being feminine. I wasn't out as queer, but I exhibited traits that my peers thought made me different, made me unlike them, made me something wrong, something disgusting. And this came out in the form of homophobic bullying. All throughout growing up, my only understanding of the word gay was as an insult. I never got any inclusivity education. My school never taught me the right meaning of the words or that it shouldn't be used to bully other people. And so for a long time, I had internalized homophobia, and I just suppressed any thoughts of the fact that I could be anything but straight and cisgender, not that I even knew that there were other possibilities. It wasn't until I got to high school, a different school that was much more inclusive, where I met the first ever queer people that I ever knew, including some faculty, that I was able to come to terms with myself. First, it started out as being an overeager ally for my friends, and eventually I started to realize that their stories paralleled my own, and I came to terms with who I was. And I realized that a school can make such a huge difference when it comes to acceptance, when it comes to understanding who you are. No matter if your community or if your family is supportive or accepting, schools have a responsibility to make sure that every single student has a safe place to learn and to grow and to be who they are. And so I decided that I wanted to make a difference for all these other kids like me, who are facing this kind of bullying, who have this kind of own self-hatred because they never knew that there was any other way. So I started a nonprofit called the Empathy Alliance to make schools safer and more inclusive for LGBTQ plus youth. And really, I think the most amazing thing for me was being able to speak to many other LGBTQ plus youth who, some were not out, some were struggling like I was, and some even younger than I was had the amazing courage to come out and be who they were and to fight for who they were. And to me, that is just so amazing that young people all around the country are finding it easier and easier to be who they are, or at least, you know, having the terminology, having the understanding of what it means to be, you know, non-binary or transgender or bisexual or asexual. I think to me that that is just so amazing in our generation. We're really seeing such a huge change. And I really wish that no other student had to go through what I went through growing up. And that has been my life's mission.
Samir, you're so powerful, and you make us all feel so strengthened and proud. Thank you so much for sharing. I'd like now to turn, if I can, to Sage Dolan Sandrino. Sage, thank you for being with us. When you saw that there wasn't enough representation of Black trans teens, you started your own creative studio and digital zine so that trans youth of color could tell their own stories. I'd love to hear your story and what you've learned about lifting up the voices of trans youth of color.
Thank you so much, and I'm so glad to be here in conversation with you all. Hi, I'm Sage Dolan Sandrino. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a queer and trans Afro-Latina change maker and artist from the Washington, D.C. area. I'm also the creative director and founder of Team, a digital studio and zine for young artists of color. Growing up, I never saw anyone like myself on screen. I only understood queerness to be enjoyable in representations that mirrored white people. And I internalized that simply because I was not white, because I was mixed, that there was never going to be an opportunity for me to experience joy at the intersections of my queerness and my Blackness. I drew that connection and denied myself, representation in my own art for so long. I erased myself from my photos, from my video work, in fear that I was not pretty enough, skinny enough, or real enough. And I think that actively combating those thoughts that I was conditioned to believe through my art has been what I feel is most authentic to my connection to activism and change making. So I decided to open my own creative studio, my own platform founded by and for specifically young artists of color, so that we can create the representation that we want, so that our work can inherently be authentic and culturally sustainable. I am trying to change the reality of violence against trans people in the streets through my work in the studio.
That's just great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's really inspiring. I'd now like to talk to Ashton Mota. Ashton, it's great to have you with us. When you came out as transgender to your family and community, you knew already that you wanted to advocate for laws that would keep you and other kids just like you safe. You and your mom have been involved in state efforts in Massachusetts to protect the rights of transgender people. Please tell us what it was like to come out and what you've learned using your amazing voice for change.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashton Moda. I use he, him pronouns. I'm 16 years old and a rising junior in high school. I'm proud, honored, and excited to be here with you all today. And before anything, I personally want to thank the Biden-Harris administration for the work that you've done, whether it be signing an executive order preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation on the first day in office, or just showing that you have the backs of us LGBTQ plus youth in your day-to-day work. I just wanted to start off by expressing that appreciation. I'm excited about the road ahead, and I'm also cognizant of the fact that there's so much work, so much more work that needs to be done. And, that's why we're all here today. To tell you all a little bit about myself, I identify as Black, Afro-Latino, and I also identify as transgender, female to male. I consider myself to be like any other teenager with interests that vary and change from month to month, even week to week sometimes. But one of my main passions is activism and advocacy. And, I've been able to pursue those passions through working on the Yes on 3 campaign in Massachusetts in 2018, working with the Gender Cool Project, the Human Rights Campaign, and through opportunities like this that give me the opportunity to speak my story, speak from my experience, and, just tell the world, what it's like to be a young transgender person of color and, just navigating the world in the position that I hold. And, after coming out and receiving support from my family, that's one of the best things I could have asked for, because it's given me a platform and a pedestal to be able to use my voice and represent a community that usually isn't given a seat at the table at these, to have these important conversations. And um, it's just truly inspiring and motivates me to do more personal experiences. After I came out, it didn't take my family long to realize that there are so many disparities when it comes to the intersectionality in our community, whether it's transgender people or just transgender people of color. And on top of that, being youth, especially, with homelessness and in the foster care system. So my family and we became a foster home for transgender youth. And right now, I currently have two transgender foster siblings, foster sisters. They're twins who identify as transgender girls. And, they've been with us for a little bit over 2 years. And they're awesome. They're my sisters. They're a part of my family. And, they've genuinely impacted me in the person who I am today. And they're just beautiful souls in the world. And they're just awesome people. And I'm glad to have met them because they truly have had an impact on me. But with that being said, with them being in my house, I've been able to see how, the foster care system does fail transgender youth of color, transgender people, LGBTQ plus youth. And there's so much work that has to be done. And I'm not going to just stand here and watch it all happen, especially when it's hurting people who I love and are so close to my heart. And the sad thing is that I know there are so many more youth just like that. And, it's really what drives me. It's what motivates me. And it's why I find it so important to use my voice as a Black, trans, Afro-Latino young person to make sure that, laws are put in place to protect everyone for just being who they are and living their lives authentically.
Wow, what a story. I want to meet your parents. Seriously. And your sisters. I'm very moved by your story, as I know we all are. And your family is a powerful example of, what we need to do to each other. We need to love and support each other. And so, thank you for sharing that. And now I'm really excited to turn over to Stella Keating. Stella, you're already a national star. You made us all so proud when you testified in front of the Senate about the importance of passing the Equality Act. You're actually the first transgender teen, I believe, ever to testify before Congress. So I'd love to hear from you about what you think passing the Equality Act means to you, and it will mean to others, young people like you. And also tell us, how did you get up the courage to go in front of the whole country and tell your story?
Yeah, so my name is Stella. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm 16 years old, and I, like Ashton, am a rising junior. And to me, nothing is more American than protecting each and every person who lives in this country. That might sound kind of cheesy, but my parents have raised me to stand up and speak out for myself, and it just as importantly, those who can't. I know that I have access to places and audiences that many of my peers don't, and many of my peers here don't. And I believe it's my responsibility to use my voice to help bring along as many others as possible. Like I said in my testimony, we represent America's future. The passing of the Equality Act is an investment in America. I've been sharing who I am and my journey since I was 7 years old, and being part of the Gender Cool Project has given me opportunities I never could have imagined, like testifying before the US Senate and talking to you. ambassador, and time again, I have seen the power of sharing who transgender and non-binary youth are and the impact. That's what we're doing with Gender Cool. My fellow Gender Cool champions like Ashton inspire me every day. Each of their accomplishments and contributions amaze me. And even hearing Samir's story and what they're now doing to, you know, make more people feel accepted, and including Sage, creating a platform and a space for transgender people of color, and specifically transgender youth of color, is just so incredible. And hearing Ashton's story and what his family is doing to create a safe space for other transgender youth who are in foster care, I am incredibly inspired to be with you all today. And I've gotten a lot of attention in the last few months, and it's important people know that I am just one of hundreds of thousands of young trans and non-binary youth in this country making a difference.
Okay, so now I'm all choked up because I'm, among other things, a mom. And none of you are my kids, but I couldn't be more proud of you and more inspired by you. Um, and you all are what give me hope for our future. And many other people, young people like you. I see that, in my own children and their friends and their generation. Is just so much more open and, mutually supportive in many ways. And just to see the dynamic among the four of you and how much you are, lifting and holding each other up is amazing. So thank you.
Hello, I'm U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona. It's an honor to join this important conversation and discuss ways we can create school environments for transgender students that are nurturing, welcoming, and affirming. Our schools must be places where students know they are safe. Let's be clear from the start. Every single student in America has immeasurable worth and limitless potential. And every student has the right to feel valued and supported so they can do their best learning. It's essential that schools and educators work to protect the rights of all students, including students who are transgender. Transgender students must be afforded the same opportunities as their peers to participate fully in and experience the joy of school, including extracurricular activities. I'm proud to share that the department affirmed this month that Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation in all education institutions that receive federal funding. We know that full inclusion at school is an important part of supporting the academic, physical, and mental well-being of our transgender youth, just as it is for all other students. Banning young people from engaging in school activities on the basis of sex defies our nation's values of inclusivity, equality, and freedom. And with our announcement, the federal government has reaffirmed that discrimination on the basis of sex, including sexual orientation and gender identity, is not only wrong, it's prohibited in our schools. Because all means all. This is important because it enables my Department of Education to work even more closely with states, districts, and others to prevent and actively combat discrimination against LGBTQ+ students in schools. This is important because students' lives will be changed for the better. We know LGBTQ+ students often face challenges in schools, including experiencing bullying and harassment at higher levels than their peers. And the COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated some of the hardships faced by our LGBTQ students. So many of these students haven't had access to school-based mental health services, affirming student organizations, or vital relationships with nurturing educators. One survey out this year found that 78% of transgender and non-binary youth said that their mental health was poor, either most of the time or always during COVID-19. That's heartbreaking. We can and we must do more to support our transgender youth. That's why my Department of Education intends to fully enforce Title IX, consistent with the analysis in the Supreme Court's landmark decision last year and President Biden's executive orders that require schools to treat transgender and gender nonconforming students in ways consistent with their gender identity. We will also promote gender equity in extracurriculars, including sports, by ensuring that schools provide equal opportunities for all students. We will enforce all of our laws that prohibit discrimination based on race, color, national origin, sex, and disability. And we urge Congress to fund the U.S. Center for Safe Sport to protect all athletes from abuse, including sexual abuse. So, if you are a transgender student, we have information and resources for you at the Office for Civil Rights. Check out the LGBTQ plus students page on the Department of Education's website at www.ed.gov. I want to say directly to all the transgender students gathered here and all across the nation, we are on your side. We've got your back. We stand with you. We see you. We hear you. We respect you. You matter. You are brave. And you are already strong, standing in the light that emanates when you can be unapologetically and authentically you. Continue to be courageous by speaking up and speaking out when you believe that you have experienced discrimination. At the Department of Education, we will stay laser focused on supporting all students, including transgender students. Because when we do, we take a stand for equality, for justice, and opportunity for everyone. I'd like to end my remarks by sharing a recent conversation I had with my cousin Alex, a transgender college student who's making our whole family proud. Alex had such great insights to share. Check it out.
Hi, I'm Alex Cardona, Secretary's cousin, and I'm a senior at the University of Hartford studying cinema communication, and I happen to be female to male transgender. I came out when I was junior to senior in high school and started my medical transition end of my senior year.
You know, for me, this is really important so that we can really kind of just elevate consciousness. And, you know, when we say all means all, we mean that here at the Department of Education. We want to make sure that we're giving you an opportunity to share your story and why it's important. I always feel that it's important to have allies that are not necessarily LGBTQ.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right?
People, especially LGBTQ people, their biggest support system could be at school. They could not have a supportive household, and I was lucky to have supportive parents, but not everyone does. And a lot of times school for these kids it's an escape for them. And having to escape to somewhere that's also unsupportive just doesn't help anyone, but having a good support system there is an escape.
Of course. You've shown a lot of courage, and that's why I really wanted to reach out. But I also want to send the message really loud and clear. We got your back. That our schools need to be safe places for all students. All students deserve a school environment that's nurturing, welcoming, and accepting, and one where you can take advantage of what the school offers.
Just if more teachers really knew the power that they had with these students. In my old high school, there was one singular teacher in the entire school who accepted me, who used my correct name, my correct pronoun, and I can't thank that teacher enough, because I did eventually leave that school, but I don't even know if I would have made it to that without knowing that at least someone at the school was there for me.
That teacher saw you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who you were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome.
If you were to see the numbers of the percentages of trans kids who are unsupported in their home environment, their school environment, their suicide rates are astronomically high compared to their cisgender counterparts. And you look at numbers and you're like, oh, that's sad, but these are kids, these are children who have their entire lives ahead of themselves, wanting to not live anymore because they're not supported in their life. For something as so simple, I guess so simple as just words, something so simple means so much to people, and it doesn't take that much effort to be a good person. It doesn't take that much effort to say the correct pronouns, say the correct name. And I think just knowing that you have that much of an impact with that little activity or little actually doing something is very important, because if teachers realize that they have that power with just words and with just maybe putting a safe place sticker on their door, like imagine what else they could do if they wanted to help them even more.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you for your courage. Thank you for your story. And Alex, my advice to you is be unapologetically you, because you shine. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Demi Lovato, and I'm so happy that the White House is hosting this virtual convening on transgender equality. It's so important because trans and non-binary kids deserve to not only feel safe and welcome everywhere they go, but to also have the support and resources they need to thrive. To all the kids out there figuring out who you are and where you fit in, there are so many people who love and support you, including me. So keep being you.
Every person in America deserves quality, affordable health care, and every American deserves access to care that is respectful, safe, and dignified. For transgender Americans, that means access to comprehensive, gender-affirming care free from discrimination. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Rachel Levine, Assistant Secretary for Health and the first openly transgender person to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. She's one of the 14% of all appointees in the Biden-Harris administration who identify as LGBTQ+, and she's leading our administration's work to advance health equity for transgender Americans.
Hello, I am Dr. Rachel Levine, the Assistant Secretary for Health. This is an exciting time for the LGBTQ+ community, and I hope that my appointment symbolizes progress. I am truly humbled to be the first openly transgender individual to serve in a Senate-confirmed position, and the first Assistant Secretary for Health who is transgender. As Vice President Harris has said, I recognize that I may be the first, but I am heartened by the knowledge that I will not be the last. Our community has a lot to applaud. We have a president who sees us and advocates for us. President Biden issued the first presidential proclamation recognizing Transgender Day of Visibility, calling on all Americans to join in the fight for full equality for all transgender people. And during his first joint address to Congress, President Biden sent an unequivocal message to the transgender community, quote, "To all transgender Americans watching at home, especially the young people, you are so brave. I want you to know your president has your back," unquote. Well, I want you to know that I have your back too, and I will do everything that I can to support and advocate for our community. Raising awareness is an important step. We must all work together across agencies and organizations to turn awareness into action. As a member of the White House's Gender Policy Council, which was established by President Biden to advance gender equity and equality in both domestic and foreign policy development and implementation, I am proud to support efforts to advance equity, inclusion, and opportunity for LGBTQ+ people through a whole-of-government approach. The administration is working to advance equity for communities who have been underserved by the federal government, and that includes my work at the Department of Health and Human Services. HHS values the health of all Americans and is committed to ensuring that the LGBTQ+ community has access to quality health care. What most excites me is the department's renewed focus on the anti-discrimination protections for the LGBTQ+ community. Fear of discrimination can lead individuals to forego care, and that can have serious negative health consequences. That is why HHS recently announced that it will interpret and enforce Section 1557 and Title IX prohibitions on discrimination on the basis of sex, and that will include discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. This means that it is the formal position of the Department of Health and Human Services that everyone, including transgender individuals, should be able to access health care free from discrimination or interference, period. This interpretation will guide our department in processing complaints and conducting investigations. The steps we're taking at HHS to prevent discrimination against LGBTQ+ Americans in healthcare settings is just one part of President Biden's executive order on preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. As a pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist, I also know the importance of gender-affirming medical care for transgender people who need it. Gender-affirming care is both medically necessary and actually life-saving, especially for transgender youth. Every American deserves the opportunity to reach their full potential and access safe and respectful health care. Unfortunately, some have sought to prevent transgender youth from accessing the health care that they need. This is politics, and politics has no place in our health care system. And actually, this defies the standards of care. Above all, we need to support trans youth and their families and parents to help them achieve the good health and quality care that they deserve. The future for our community is brighter, but we have not made progress unless we have made progress for all. Together, we must strongly advocate for the most underserved and marginalized in our community, including our trans youth, and trans women of color who are at risk not only of harassment or discrimination, but actually of violence and murder. Now, I am a positive and optimistic person, and I'd like to leave you with a message of hope. There is a place for you in America. Thank you.
In his first week in office, President Biden affirmed that every qualified American should be able to serve our nation in uniform. He rescinded the discriminatory ban on transgender service members, ensuring that openly trans service members can proudly serve in the United States military. Transgender service members, like Lieutenant Colonel Bree Fram, make our country stronger and more secure. Let's hear her story.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Bree Fram, an astronautical engineer in the U.S. Air Force, soon to transfer to the Space Force, and I'm transgender. In March 2019, while serving in a command position, I looked into my hotel room's bathroom mirror as I pulled on a men's sport coat and something cemented. This wasn't me. Facing a soon-to-be implemented ban on transgender military service, it was the final realization that if I didn't take action right then to live authentically, I would be deliberately stunting my growth as a leader and as a person. My journey as a transgender service member, though challenging, has been an intense and rewarding path of personal and professional development. Despite the discriminatory policy then in place, I've enjoyed incredible support from my leaders and from those I've had the honor and privilege to lead throughout my transition. Yet as one of approximately 1,600 transgender service members who served openly at the time, I was a member of an endangered species, officially labeled a burden and a disruption to the military, despite all evidence to the contrary, until policy changed again this year. Now, thanks to the action of President Biden during his first week in office to restore open service, we will not be the last transgender people to wear the uniforms of this nation. Serving openly allowed me to flourish as my authentic self. My authenticity opened new pathways of communication and connection. I was a better commander because of it. Removing real or perceived barriers to authenticity that force people to hide who they are is a gift to individuals and organizations. With those burdens removed, people who previously dedicated their mental energy to protecting their identity can now dedicate themselves fully to the mission. For the military, service members could have been good or even great at what they did, but they weren't reaching their full potential. With our biggest advantage in conflict being our people, we need everyone at their best. Reopening military service to transgender individuals is a gift to our nation. Every time the military has integrated minority groups, from African Americans to women to lesbians, gays, and bisexuals, We have emerged stronger because of it. They have all served with honor and distinction. It's the same with transgender service members. The United States military is going to fight and win in the future based on brain power. And if some of those brains just happen to be in transgender bodies capable of meeting all physical standards, they could be our future heroes. A society that doesn't tap into the potential of all its members naturally self-limits what it can do. But the United States dreams big and can't afford to miss out on the talents of anyone willing to dedicate their lives to those dreams. As someone who has sworn to support and defend the Constitution that underpins those big dreams, I'm thrilled that I and other trans service members will have the opportunity to help make those dreams a reality for our fellow Americans.
One of the best parts of being a kid is playing sports on your school team or with friends. But in some states around the country, state legislatures have tried to ban transgender kids from participating in school sports activities. These bans are wrong. Transgender kids belong on the field just like everybody else. I'm excited to introduce a trailblazing athlete, Chris Mosier, the first openly transgender athlete to represent our country on Team USA, to share more about why inclusion in sports matters for all kids.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Chris Mosier. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm a Team USA athlete. In 2016, I became the first transgender man to represent the United States in men's international competition. And in 2020 was the first trans man to participate in the men's Olympic trials event. I'm also the founder of transathlete.com, the go-to resource for information about policies and best practices for the inclusion of trans and non-binary athletes in sport. This year, we've seen the worst attacks on the transgender community, with 150 pieces of anti-transgender legislation introduced by state lawmakers across the country. Half of those bills, 75 bills, targeted transgender youth in sport. This year alone, over 30 states attempted to pass legislation that would ban transgender youth, younger versions of me, from playing sports with their friends. And in 8 states this year, bans on trans youth were enacted, making 9 states in our country that now have laws that would ban trans youth from playing on teams that align with their identity. So often in these conversations, the voices of the youth who are most impacted are missing. So I'm thrilled to be joined here today by Sarah Rose Huckman and Libby Gonzalez. First, could each of you introduce yourselves? Sarah, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Rose Huckman. I'm 20 years old. Background of sports, I think I did 4 sports back in high school, track, cross country, running, cross country skiing, and alpine skiing. I love doing sports just because it makes me who I am today, and it keeps me upbeat and positive. And I am currently a part of Changing the Game, a documentary centered on transgender athletes. It's out on Hulu.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah Rose. And Libby, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Libby Gonzalez. I live in Texas and I'm 11 years old and I use she, her pronouns.
Excellent.
I really love swimming. I feel like I get to be myself when I'm swimming. And I really also enjoy martial arts, basketball, and yoga. And I would really like to try tennis.
Great, thank you so much. Libby, let's start with you. You have been an advocate for trans rights since you were 7 years old. Why has playing sports been so important for you?
Actually, I've been advocating for my community since I was 6 years old, and I think that it's very important to let kids like me to play sports because it helps us stay healthy, and we get to make new friends, and I get to play with my friends that I have, and it's really fun.
Yeah, we know there are so many benefits to playing sports as a kid. Thank you for sharing that with us. Sarah Rose, you mentioned the documentary at the start. You were just featured in the incredible documentary, Changing the Game. Why did you decide to participate in the film, and what do you hope that people are taking away from it?
Yeah, thank you. I really decided to partake in changing the game right when I realized that this was something that needed to be put out into the world. We need more trans representation in sports, and we need more trans representation in general. Um, and I really hope one big takeaway I really hope is coming from this is that trans athletes and trans people are human beings, and we just want to be able to do the sports and the things that we love without the fear of being discriminated against or the fear of being attacked because we are different from the other people. I just hope that people realize that we are just trying to live our lives and do things that we love.
I love that. And the film does an incredible job of sharing that. So thank you for being a part of it. Let's do one more question for both of you. What advice would you give other trans kids who want to play sports but are facing hurdles? Sarah Rose, let's start with you on this one.
Of course. I would just say keep being yourself, keep doing the things that you love. Remember, even if the times are hard in the moment, just know that you have people who love you and accept you all over the world. It may not be where you are right now, but you'll find your people, you'll find your family, your significant other. Um, you'll find it. You'll find the joy in sports, you'll find the joy in family, and just know that you're amazing and you're validated wherever you go.
How about you, Libby?
I would say, like, don't let anyone change who you are. You have people that support you. We got your back, even in the darkest corner, I guess. um, and just never lose hope. Mm, you have a ton of people that support you and care about you.
Wise words. Thank you so much, both of you. My advice to trans kids, to every trans kid out there, I want you to know that you can be your authentic self and continue to play the sports that you love. You have so many people out here fighting for you, from your peers like Libby and Sarah Rose to professional athletes like myself, and we will never stop fighting for you. My personal mission since I came out, and my motto since I came out in 2010, is to be the person that I needed when I was younger, to be that role model that I wish that I had. And so it is so wonderful to be in the presence of new role models and advocates. Thank you so much, Libby and Sarah Rose, for joining me in this conversation today. It is so wonderful to spend time with you, and I cannot wait to see all of the incredible things that you both go on to do.
Hello, my name is Elliot Hinkle. I use they, them pronouns, and I grew up in Wyoming's foster care system, but I live in Portland, Oregon now. I'm a transmasculine, non-binary person who grew up in foster care and didn't feel I could come out as fully myself until I left foster care at the age of 19. When I turned 19, I moved away from Wyoming and went to school in Portland, Oregon, where I was able to be myself as first a lesbian and then a trans person. And the adults in my life are some of the people who were pivotal in making sure that I felt I could be me. I didn't think I could do that while I was in foster care, but the adults in my life really helped me get to a place where I could find that support. The adults that were kind of crazy about me and wanted to make sure that I was fully me, and brought myself fully to the table. My hope is that for LGBTQ youth in foster care, that they can be in a place where they also have the support that they need, that they can have loving and affirming homes, because affirming LGBTQ youth is suicide prevention. And for myself, having grown up with mental health struggles and suicidal ideation from not having that, it's so important that young people today get that, so they can fully be themselves, as we're in a generation right now where youth aren't necessarily worried about what people think about them. They want to be who they are, and I hope that that energy continues and that they get what they deserve, which is loving, supporting families, friends, and communities.
Transgender Americans have led the movement for LGBTQ plus equality for generations. Today, transgender Americans are also leading our nation as elected public servants. Representation matters, and the 4 trailblazing elected officials we're about to hear from are showing transgender youth across our country that the sky is the limit.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dana Karam. I'm the Virginia State Delegate, grateful to represent the people of the 13th District of the Virginia House of Delegates, which includes the city of Manassas Park and the western Prince William County portions of Haymarket, Gainesville, and my lifelong home, Manassas, as the first out-and-seated transgender state legislator in American history. Today, I'm joined here with 3 other barrier-breaking trans women in public service. Each of us were the first to be elected to office that we now hold in our states. But as Vice President Kamala Harris says, we may have been the first, but we won't be the last. We are here today to talk about why it matters when trans women lead, the barriers we faced, and how we overcame them. First, I am grateful and honored to introduce my friend Andrea Jenkins. Andrea, you and I were elected the same night, November 7th, 2017, and you had the distinction of becoming the first Black openly trans woman elected to public office in the United States. Please tell us your story and why representation of Black trans women in politics matters. What does it mean for how you approach racial equity, gender equity, and LGBTQ rights?
Hey, good. Thank you, Danica. And it's just so great to be here with you and all of my other fellow colleagues that are serving our communities all around the country. My name is Andrea Jenkins, and I am Vice President of the Minneapolis City Council. I live and work in Minneapolis, and I represent the 8th Ward in Minneapolis, now infamous for being home to the murder of George Floyd. We in the 8th Ward are seeking justice for our community and our city, and so grateful that we have been able to push the narrative around public safety and policing in our communities that will hopefully lead to positive systemic change in the way we keep our communities safe. I decided to run for office in 2017 after realizing that cities will be the front line of change in our communities. And I wanted to be a part of that process. And so we put together an amazing campaign team, a very diverse campaign team that was led by a young woman of color and queer and trans identified people working on our campaign, building political power and community power. And so it has just been one wild ride, as you may imagine, here in Minneapolis, dealing with the impacts from the coronavirus, and then subsequently the racial reckoning that has been transforming our entire nation. This has been a challenging time for elected officials all throughout the country, and it has tested the mettle of all of us. And I am so glad to be on the team with all of you, Danica, and I'd like to just introduce my fellow panelists. State Senator Sarah McBride.
Thank you so much, Andrea. It is great to be on with you, Danica, and Stephanie for a really historic conversation between all of us as out trans elected officials, something that really wouldn't have been possible just a decade ago. My name's Sarah McBride. I'm the state senator for Delaware's 1st State Senate District, which includes parts of our biggest city, Wilmington, and Bellefonte and Claymont, which is actually the community that President Biden spent his teenage years in and went to high school in. I first got involved in politics and government and advocacy as a young person. And in many ways, my journey to advocacy and politics ties into my own journey toward authenticity, to coming out. Because as a young trans person growing up, figuring out who I am and trying to figure out how I fit into this world, wondering whether our democracy was big enough to include someone like me, I got involved in politics because I saw that politics was the place where every avenue of society converges and where you can make the most amount of change for the most number of people in the most number of ways possible. And I think for me, I got involved because I thought perhaps even if I never come out, perhaps I can spend my life trying to build a world where more people can live openly, authentically, fully, and freely in our society, including more trans people. And I actually had the opportunity of getting involved early and calling the president's late son, Bo, my first boss in politics. He was an incredible man, a compassionate person, a dear friend, and an amazing ally to the trans community. I also come to this work not just as someone who is trans, but also as someone who's loved someone who's trans. I met my future husband, Andrew, who was a transgender man fighting for equality, and we fell in love. After he was diagnosed with cancer and after serving as his caregiver and eventually losing Andy just days after we married, I decided to run for office because I saw in that experience, one, how lucky we were to have time together, how lucky he was to be able to get the care that he needed, how lucky I was to be able to take time off work and not have to sacrifice my income to be by his side. And I saw how urgent these issues are. I saw that every single time we ask people to sit back and allow for a slow conversation to take place before we treat them with dignity and ensure them opportunity, we are asking people to watch their one life pass by without the respect and fairness that everyone deserves, and that's too much to ask of anyone. And ultimately, I threw my hat in the ring for state senate here in Delaware because I'm hopeful. After 10 years as an advocate at first the state and then eventually national level with the Human Rights Campaign, I saw that it's always in our biggest challenges that we take our most significant steps forward. And that the story of our movement, the story that we celebrate in Pride Month and rededicate ourselves to in Pride Month, is the story of LGBTQ people transforming change that once seemed so impossible that it was almost incomprehensible, first into possibility and then into reality. And I felt like if we did that on so many issues, that we could continue to do it for our community and that we could do it on all of the issues that matter to LGBTQ people, from non-discrimination protections to economic opportunity to healthcare to education to transportation to criminal justice reform. And so I am now serving in my first term filled with hope and optimism that we have as a community, both the individual and collective capacity to bring about seemingly impossible change. And that has been informed in large part by my experiences working for, knowing, and calling the Biden family friends and allies. And I am just so excited that we are joining on this panel under the administration of Joe Biden, who I have seen throughout my life his deep commitment to trans rights. One of the first national politicians to embrace and champion trans rights. I've seen the tears in his eyes when we talk about violence against trans women of color. I've seen and heard the passion in his voice when he talks about passing the Equality Act. And I've seen his big heart when I came out to him and Bo and Dr. Biden and the whole Biden family. And so I am just so thrilled that we have the opportunity to serve alongside a president who truly sees us, cares for us, and is fighting alongside us. And speaking of someone who fights every single day for our community, I have the privilege of turning things over to Stephanie Byers, who's a member of the Kansas State House of Representatives representing the 86th district. Stephanie is both the first out trans legislator in Kansas and also the first Native American trans person elected to public office in our country. So I'll turn things over to my friend, Stephanie Byers.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm 58 years old, and I'm going to throw that out there at the beginning because the fact that means in my life, I was a child in the 60s, an adolescent in the 70s, became an adult in the 80s. And when we think about what has happened to our country during those decades, how we've become more and more accepting of people that may have been thought of as different earlier on as we progress forward. And here I am in Kansas serving as the first open trans legislator in the state of Kansas. For 32 years, I was a public school teacher. I taught band and orchestra, and that was my life. But I also taught most of that at Wichita North High School, which is a Title I inner city urban school that serves a very diverse population, predominantly Hispanic. And so I've been there in the fights when we talk about the access to education for dreamers, That was been a part of my advocacy to begin with. I advocated to keep the fine arts as a part of public schools because it's integral to what goes on. And in 2014, when I began to live my life authentically for who I really am, it was an easy step forward then to make that advocacy just shift over into supporting the LGBTQ community in all the ways. And of course, we see what happened almost immediately. We encountered at the state level bills banning trans people from bathrooms, an experience that I actually had when I was younger as a Native American, walking into a gas station in one of our Western states, and my father asking for the key to the restroom, and the station owner looking at us and saying, "Are you all Injun? Well, you might be nice people. I just don't let Injuns use my bathroom." And so that hit really near and dear to my heart very quickly and became a part of what I began to speak out. In 2018, I was named the GLSEN National Educator of the Year, which gave me a little bit bigger voice and more of a platform to be able to address these issues. In 2019, I retired from teaching, and shortly after was asked by GLSEN to represent them in a rally in October out in front of the U.S. Supreme Court on the same day they heard oral arguments on Bostock versus Clayton County. And so that voice added to the group of people that were there, talking about how if we can make on the basis of sex include gender identity and sexual orientation, how that would change so much for the people of the LGBTQ community across the United States, especially for those people who are transgender. At that point in time, I made my decision that I would run for the seat that we had open here in District 86 for the Kansas State Legislature. And of course, in 2020, was elected and was able to join the two other out openly LGBTQ members of our legislature. This year has seen an unprecedented number of bills attacking trans community, especially trans youth. And here in Kansas, we're no exception, especially when we look at a supermajority that push those bills to begin with. Having a person who is transgender stand in that house and directly address the other members of that house about what it means, how it feels to have those things launched at you, and it's not just a matter of statistics, it is actually a matter of individuals and people, makes a tremendous difference. The outpouring of emails and cards that came from the trans youth across Kansas, knowing that they have an advocate who looks like them, who understands their experience to some level, and who speaks for them, gives them hope. It makes a tremendous difference for everyone to know that if there's somebody that's there, as was said, if you can see it, you can be it. And I'm proud to be able to be that person that's standing there holding the door open for the next trans person that wants to run for office in Kansas, and to keep that open communication going so that we can keep this representation where it needs to be. I'm glad to be a part of this panel and appreciate all the opportunity we've given to this. And it's my turn now to turn back to our host and to talk about Danica. You have inspired, Danica, so many of us that are here today because you're the first one to break these barriers. What inspired you to run for public office, and what advice do you have for other transgender Americans who may be interested in becoming leaders in their community?
Well, thank you so much, Representative Byers. And again, thank you to Senator McBride, and thank you to Councilwoman Jenkins so much for joining me, and just to everyone out there who's joining this conversation. What inspired me to run was, just my mom's commute. It was the fact that it was so bad when in the mid 90s when I was in 6th grade, and I'd be sitting at school until 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, waiting for her to come pick me up because she was battling it out on Route 28 for 2 hours. And, at the same time, when I had to make the decision to run, I knew it was, what my platform would be. It was a pretty easy decision because my predecessor was more concerned about where I went to the bathroom than how his constituents got to work. And so I decided to go do something about it. And I had to remember also that just because there weren't a lot of people like me in office didn't mean that we didn't have a lot of allies, didn't mean that we didn't have a lot of champions. And I remember in 2013, when then Delaware Attorney General Beau Biden was working with then advocate Sarah McBride to get the Delaware legislature to actually pass a trans rights bill, and how important that was. And so then 2 years later, after he died, and he had successfully spearheaded that legislation and got signed into law, I drove out to Dover to pay my respects to Beau. And when I got there, and I saw his flag draped casket, and I went to just offer my grievances to my grievance to then Vice President Biden. Vice President Biden, when I told him I just wanted to thank him for raising the son with the character of Beau, because when he was fighting for trans rights in Delaware, he was fighting for trans rights for all of us. Vice President Biden, his eyes were about quarter mast. He was clearly tired. He takes his hands, he puts them on my shoulders. He looks me in the eye and he goes, "We mean that. We mean that." He then brought me in for a hug, kissed the back of my right hand. And within the next 2 years, we would have a vice president of the United States who was notorious for attacking LGBTQ people. How different things became at that point. But under a vice president, Mike Pence, it became a very easy decision to run for office with that. It became a very easy decision to want to inspire people, to want to tell them that they can succeed because of who they are, not despite it. And their civil rights are worth protecting because of who they are. And so now in the Virginia General Assembly, I've been grateful to be able to pass 23 bills into law. And at the same time, 3 of those bills have been pro-LGBTQ equality bills, right alongside my 8 bills to feed hungry kids, right along my work, for transparency, for transportation reform, and everything else. To be able to do that, to be able to send that message, a positive message in Virginia when we were seeing so many hostile bills in other states across the country, I want trans young people to be able to look at what we're doing and say, hey, you know what? We're welcome here. It's okay for us to be here. And in 2017, just to close on a good note, in 2017, when I launched my campaign, about a week into that campaign, a mother in Roanoke, about 4 hours away, showed an interview to her daughter, who was a little trans girl who was in 5th grade, who had tried to jump out of a second floor window when she didn't think anyone could ever understand someone like her. She said she remembered that there was hope in that article, and that's why she gave it to her daughter to read. And she read it through 3 times, and she looked up and she goes, "She's just like me." And her mom goes, "She's just like you." And she goes, "Well, how does she do it? How does Danica put herself out there?" And her mom says, "Because she knows who she is, that she's confident who she is." And Clara said, "Well, if Danica can do it, so can I." She spent the rest of the campaign, drove 4 hours, with her mom all the way up to Northern Virginia, and we campaigned together. We did, ads together and everything. And then on election night 2017, when Andrea, myself, and 6 other trans people across the country were winning elections, when I got to Waters and Brewery in Lake Ridge that night for the big party, after I had found out in Gainesville that I won, the first person I saw when I got outside my car was Clara. And so I picked her up. I looked her dead in the eye, just like Vice President Biden had done to me in 2016 or 2015. And I told her, "Honey, you can be president. You can be whoever you want to be, whatever you want to be, because we just won." And that's the message I want to send to trans people across the country today, is that you can be yourself. You can find safe places to be yourself, whether it's in Virginia, Delaware, Minnesota, or even Kansas. There is someone here who cares about you. There is someone here who can relate to your story and know that not only are you never alone with this, but your story has the ability to change your community, to change your state, and to change your country. And when you change a country, you change the world. So thank you all so much to my colleagues for joining us today. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. Thank you to the Biden administration for giving us the space to be able to have this conversation. And please take care of yourselves and each other. Happy Pride Month, everyone.
Hi, my name is Schaefer Zaret. I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm a trans activist, organizer, and an advocate for transgender youth and an ambassador of Ariana Center, Trans Latina Florida. I'm joined here today by 7 other dynamic organizers from across the country, transgender young women of color and gender non-binary young people of color, who are leading the change in their communities. This conversation is specifically about intersectionality. It is about centering the leadership of trans girls of color, young women of color, and gender nonconforming youth, and recognizing their unique lived experience at the intersection of their race, ethnicity, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, and other identities, and recognizing the unique barriers they face to equity and opportunity. So let's jump in. As I stated earlier, I'm joined by incredible youth leaders and organizers who are driving change in their communities. Leaders that identify as transgender girls and young women and/or gender non-binary youth of color. These are leaders that advocate for policy at the intersection of race, gender, gender identity, and sexual orientation. There really is so much value in lived experience that drives this change, and there's so much value in centering leaders at the intersection of all of their multiple identities. So let's hear from them. First, we'll start with some introductions. We want to hear more from these young leaders. And we'll start with Jamie, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jamison Ford, but I go by Jamie. I use any pronouns. I'm from Southeast DC, and I'm an organizer here with DC Girls Coalition, United Leaders for Freedom, Black Swan, and Black Millennials for Flint.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And next, let's hear from Gia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gia. I use she, her pronouns, and I would say that I'm an LGBTQ advocate and I identify as a trans woman.
Thank you. And next, let's hear from India.
My name is India. I'm 16 years old. I'm from South Carolina. I'm with a national agenda for Black girls, and I'm also part of Every Black Girl. And I'm non-binary.
Thank you. And Rebecca.
Hello, my name is Rebecca York. I use she and they pronouns, and I am from Maryland. I am a workplace educator with Out and Equal Workplace Advocates.
Wonderful, thank you. And Adeline?
Hi, my name is Adeline Mihil. I use she, her pronouns, and I am from South Texas.
Thank you. And finally, Logan.
Good morning. My name is Logan. My pronouns are they, them. I am an organizer, co-director, and co-conspirator based in Miami, Florida.
Great, or being Miami, just like me. Thank you so much. And now we're going to get into some really great questions for our young people. First, we'll start with Jamie. Jamie, you've been involved in social justice work since the 2nd grade. Wow. What inspired your advocacy?
As I said, I'm Jamie, and I think there were a lot of factors that went into me wanting to get into social justice work, but I think the biggest part was the community that I lived in. I was really fortunate to grow up and be around and meet so many strong and inspiring people of color here in DC, and many of them are already involved in social justice, like Latricia Adams and Samantha Davis. So just being able to see them speak and hold so much power and take up space is really what inspired me to do the same.
I love that. And thank you so much for channeling that into your work. I love to see that. And next, we'll go to Gia. Gia, what is one of the biggest barriers you'd say that transgender girls and young women of color face in their schools and communities?
Yeah, first off, I just want to say I'm from Connecticut. I forgot to mention that earlier. But I would say one of the biggest barriers is support. And I think that the reason that is because there isn't enough education out there for people of color and for LGBTQ people in general, especially for trans people of color like myself. And I would say that when I was younger, personally, I didn't see much education on this topic or anything. And as I got older and I discovered the internet, I discovered so many negative things. And there is still a lot of negative things out there, but I wouldn't say that when I did come out as transgender, that was my experience in any way. I had a very positive experience. And for me, it's really important to be able to educate young kids in a positive way on what it means to be transgender or a person of color, because that is super important. And I actually wrote a book, a kid's book about being transgender, and I'm super excited. It just came out, and I'm really hoping that it educates young kids in the classroom, because the biggest barrier is educating those people at a young age so they have a positive association with a trans person or a person of color. And that's so important for changing the narrative in today's society.
Such amazing accomplishments, and congratulations on the book. That's really amazing. Representation matters, and you're living that every day. Thank you so much. Next, we'll go to India. So India, in South Carolina, you spend time organizing for a national agenda for Black girls. Why is having policy that supports Black girls, trans Black girls, and gender nonconforming youth of color so important?
Okay. Hi, my name is India. And I said, we are at the crossroads of racism, sexism, and transphobia. We need policies written and passed to protect with our input, to protect us and to protect our rights and to protect our joy. Black girls, Black trans girls, and gender nonconforming youth of color are always forgotten or intentionally left out of the conversation. And we have the power to change that. I want to live a life that is free and I deserve to.
Yes, you do, and you choose organizing to do that. Why do you choose organizing? What does it mean to you? How do you channel that passion into your work?
Well, I challenged it into my work by saying, I am 16 years old and I've been organizing for 5 years. Organizing is a part of my identity. Working with other young people like me is empowering, and I believe that people need to hear our stories. When we share our stories collectively, we make a bigger impact. My organizing experience with Every Black Girl and a national agenda for Black girls has allowed me to expand my work nationally as I build community with others, Black girls, and gender nonconforming youth of color to create a world that accepts us, uplifts us in our entirety, truly is reflective of us and our whole selves.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad you made that choice to start organizing, representing your community, and raising that visibility for all of us throughout the community. Thank you so much. Next, we'll go to Rebecca. So, Rebecca, this year we have seen countless tough moments of racial reckoning in our country. We've seen heightened violence in the AAPI community, including violence at the intersection of racism, sexism, and gender-based violence. What does it mean for you to lead as a non-binary young person?
My identities as a queer, non-binary Asian American are central to how I experience the world. They inform my work as an LGBTQ trainer as well. Something you might not know just from looking at me, though, is that I'm also a transracial, transnational adoptee with white parents. And that's also essential to my lived experience. I clearly belonged to my white family, but growing up, outsiders, the people who didn't know me, didn't agree. Their message was, you're not who you think you are. But what did they know? I've always lived in this place in between worlds, as an Asian adoptee and as a non-binary person. Of course, there were really painful moments of exclusion, but they gave me the ability to see people beyond just what meets the eye. If I don't live in just one world, then chances are other people don't either. In my role as a workplace educator at Out and Equal, I try to lead people into hearing one another and viewing each other not as labels or categories, but really as people. People with talent, people with diverse lived experiences, people with the drive to be compassionate to one another. For too long, we've pretended that people like me don't exist. Forums like this, where we're elevating these identities, make me hopeful for what's ahead.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rebecca. Myself, as an adoptee as well, with white parents, as a Latinx trans person, I can relate to balancing both worlds, that friction and tension. And you mentioned it briefly, but how does your identity also impact how you advocate for your communities as you see it now?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I am an educator, a trainer on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion as they pertain to LGBTQ identities for workplaces. And prior to that, I was doing work around LGBTQ youth inclusion, again, working with young people and parents and educators. And really, as that adoptee, as this person who's in an in-between space of identity that is often overlooked, I find that I am more often equipped to bridge that gap, to be that communicator, bringing those two often disparate or kind of at odds opinions together into the same room.
Well, it's a beautiful, delicate balance, and we're happy to see it and so grateful for your work. Thank you so much. And now we'll move to Adeline. So how can schools do a better job at making transgender girls of color feel safe and included in their school environment?
Well, I've been in both environments, one very positive, and then whenever the administration switched, it was very negative, and it was because they didn't keep my privacy private. They were informing all the parents and they were telling them all this stuff, and that put me in a very uncomfortable situation.
Thank you so much for sharing that really personal experience. So if I were to ask you and you were to just sum it up, what do trans girls need in school? What do you need in school?
We need the administration to be educated on the topic, and we need something to protect us because it's getting out of control.
Yes, definitely. And as we look to create safe spaces, sometimes we have the intention to make things safe, but as you mentioned about sharing private information about your transition, it ended up doing more harm and not making you feel safe in school.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing that with us, Adeline.
you're welcome.
And finally, we'll go to Logan. Logan, what does it mean to be an ally for transgender and gender nonconforming young people of color?
To be an ally for trans and gender nonconforming youth, especially those of color, means actually showing up in ways that matter, right? So changing your logo to the pride flag colors and other like showy displays of solidarity while trans and gender nonconforming youth are consistently under attack and experiencing violence is ultimately meaningless. So to be an ally means to uplift our voices and honor our labor. To be an ally means to stop murdering Black trans women so that their life expectancy can surpass 35 years of age. To be an ally means to stop tokenizing us to show how much of an ally you are. We've been demanding for the quality of life that we're owed, and y'all have just continued to fail us. So if you want to be an ally, now is the time to actually start listening to us.
Right. Listen and think before acting. Just be supportive, but also, like you said, uplift those voices. Thank you so much for that perspective. It's really important, especially as a resident with you in Miami, Florida. We're seeing it front and center right now. Well, thank you all. Our communities, I know, are better and stronger because of our collective leadership, because we have a seat at the table to impact policy and lead improvements. I've really been inspired by all of your answers, by your work, by your passion and your advocacy. And I'm excited to continue to see federal policy that unapologetically lifts up, centers, and protects trans girls of color, trans women of color, and gender non-binary youth of color. I've been your moderator for the day, Schaefer Zaret. From myself, Ariana Center Trans Latina Florida, our panelists, and all of those on today, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you out in the community.
My name is Kristen Clark, Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice. Across the country, we are witnessing disturbing attacks on the rights and freedoms of transgender people. Members of the transgender community, especially transgender women of color, face harrowing rates of harassment and violence at school, in their neighborhoods, in the workplace, and at the doctor's office. Transgender people face laws and policies that penalize them just for being who they are. History shows that those with power and privilege must fight with and for those still seeking to enjoy this nation's promise of equal justice under law. The Civil Rights Division is here to continue that fight. Just last week, we filed statements of interest in 2 federal court cases, one in West Virginia and the other in Arkansas, to explain how federal civil rights laws protect the rights of transgender youth targeted by discriminatory state actions. Right now in West Virginia, BPJ, an 11-year-old girl, is fighting for a chance to participate on her middle school's sports teams. She's from a family of runners and, like so many other kids, wants to follow in their footsteps. She wants to join the girls' track and cross-country teams. She wants the experience of being on a team with her classmates and friends. But BPJ is transgender, and because of that, she may not get that chance. West Virginia has passed a law that bans outright middle school girls who are transgender, like BPJ, from participating on girls' sports teams. This law and others like it target and single out transgender youth, denying opportunities for growth and development that should be open to all students. For that reason, last week, we at the Justice Department and the U.S. Department of Education filed a statement of interest in BPJ's lawsuit explaining how West Virginia's laws violate both the Constitution and Title IX. In Arkansas, the state legislature recently passed a law that will prevent transgender youth from receiving medically necessary health care to affirm their gender identity. For transgender youth, that medical care can be life-saving. By banning gender-affirming care and punishing providers for even making referrals, the Arkansas law stands between transgender youth and their doctors. It substitutes the judgment of lawmakers for that of medical professionals. It jeopardizes the physical and mental health of vulnerable young people. And as we wrote in our statement of interest last week, it violates the Constitution. We cannot and will not stand by as states deny crucial health care to transgender youth for reasons that are rooted in bias and prejudice. The Civil Rights Division is also acting to address the scourge of violence targeting transgender people, especially Black transgender women and other transgender women of color. No one should have to live in fear because of who they are. In March, the Attorney General called for an expedited review of how the Justice Department can improve enforcement of laws that prohibit hate crimes and hate incidents, including those based on actual or perceived gender identity. Based on that review, we're working now to improve incident reporting. We're ramping up law enforcement training and coordination at all levels of government, and we're prioritizing community outreach. We also know that transgender people face alarmingly high rates of sexual violence and abuse. And in our county's prisons and jails, those risks are even greater. Transgender people are 9 times more likely to be sexually assaulted by other inmates than the rest of the U.S. population. And that's why we weighed in on a case involving Ashley Diamond, a woman who is transgender but is serving time in a Georgia men's prison. In April, we filed a statement of interest in Ms. Diamond's case alleging repeated sexual assaults by other prisoners. Our brief explained that the 8th Amendment of the Constitution requires prisons to provide reasonable protection to all prisoners, including transgender prisoners, from serious harm, including sexual abuse. Whether in prisons, in schools, at work, or just walking down the street, transgender people face discrimination at nearly every turn. The Civil Rights Division will continue to use every tool at our disposal to stand up for transgender people and to fight the unlawful discrimination they face. And we'll continue to lead and support other federal agencies in their efforts to do the same. On his first day in office, the President signed Executive Order 13988, preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. The order directed agencies to work with the Justice Department to consider whether the reasoning of the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Bostock, a Title VII employment case, applies to other statutes that prohibit sex discrimination. We began working to implement this executive order on the very day it was issued. Since then, we sent a memo to all agency civil rights and general counsel offices explaining that Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. And we've worked with agencies across the federal government to help them implement the executive order's requirements. Those agencies are full and essential partners in this important work. To the transgender community, especially transgender youth, we want you to know that we're working every day to meet the executive order's goal that every person, quote, be treated with respect and dignity and able to live without fear, no matter who they are, or whom they love. If you or someone you know is facing discrimination because you are transgender, we want to know. You can file a complaint now at civilrights.justice.gov. We see you, we hear you, and we will keep fighting for your inclusion, your dignity, and your equal rights under law.
Thank you for joining the White House virtual convening on transgender equality. Thank you to the amazing leaders who joined us from across the country and to the young people who demonstrated extraordinary courage in sharing these personal stories.